In today's talk, I'll talk about an ongoing effort that we have between us at CMU and the county government of the county that we live in, the Allegheny County in Pennsylvania, around using AI machine learning to help target limited financial resources for preventing homelessness. Just a quick shout to the wonderful people that I get to work with. As Jesus mentioned, our team works across machine learning and public policy. We are practitioners and researchers and educators in this intersection. We study how to use AI machine learning in public policy decision-making systems to improve societal outcomes, and how to leverage these massive amounts of data that public systems and social systems kind of create and generate to improve outcomes in society. This particular project that I'm going to talk about started as a student-led project back in 2022. We have this summer fellowship called Data Science for Social Good, where graduate students, PhD students, and master students primarily come together and work on real-world projects. And this project started like that. And I want to give a shout out to Arun, Abhikat, and Joe, who did a lot of the initial work on this project before we took that along from them. Before we get into the actual specifics of the project, thought it would be helpful to give a little bit more context into the policy problem that we're dealing with, because this is an international audience, and I feel like this problem of evictions and rental assistance is primarily a United States specific problem context. Even though the problem context and policy context is US specific, I think the lessons learned from this project and the problem template from a machine learning perspective is transferable to other domains that are relevant to other countries and contexts as well. So in the United States, in this graph, basically what you can see is how much of the income that families spend on housing. That you can see that when we get to the extremely low income families, overwhelming majority of their paycheck, upwards of 70% of their paycheck, goes towards housing. So poor families overwhelmingly spend a much higher percentage of their paycheck into rent and housing. And most poor families tend to end up renting rather than owning. So in most lower end of the income range, above 70% of their paycheck tend to go to housing. That means you're kind of living one emergency, like a health event or your car breaking down or any shock to your system away from not being able to pay your rent. And most of these people live paycheck to paycheck, right? So if you miss your rent payments, that means you are now at the peril of a landlord. The landlord can evict you from your house. And in the United States, there are about 3.6 million eviction cases gets filed in the US. There's a lab at Princeton who studies evictions primarily. They have all these numbers to them. A sociology group that does really important work, if you want to check them out, led by Professor Matthew Desmond, who wrote the book Evicted as well, about the eviction crisis in the United States. That's just an aside. So 3.6 million cases in the whole country. And when you come to the Allegheny County, the county that we live in, that number is above 13,000 cases. So 13,000 evictions cases gets filed every single year. And we see that over 80% of them gets ruled in favor of the landlord. So the landlord wins the case. That means they have a legal right to evict that tenant. So evictions have a lot of bad outcomes. One is losing your home can have health outcomes, health implications, education implications for kids. Like there's a lot of instability that gets created when you get evicted from your home. And some of them end up homeless, living on the streets, right? So to mitigate this issue, governments implement programs called housing stabilization programs. The most common version of this is rental assistance, where if you're a struggling renter and you're facing eviction, if you can't pay rent, you can go to the government and say, hey, I'm having trouble. The government basically pays your rent. This is a temporary financial assistance program. So they're not going to pay your rent forever. They're going to give like a specific set of months. We're going to like weather the shock that you kind of have until you get back on your feet. In Allegheny County, how this works is basically if you are struggling and if you are facing eviction, you can call or go in person to this housing stabilization center, or like send an email and say, hey, I'm struggling. Can I have the money? Can I have the money? So they will evaluate your eligibility and serve you. So this is the context in which this project started. County came to us about 3 years ago with 3 main questions. One is the federal government during the pandemic enacted this emergency rental assistance program, because during like when COVID-19 was going rampant, you couldn't have people getting kicked. People are losing their jobs, so they couldn't pay rent. We couldn't have people getting evicted from their homes and living in shelters, and that exacerbates the health problem, right? So what the government did was, and at the same time, there are certain landlords who rely on the income of their rental house. So government basically allocated $4 to $6 billion for rental assistance across the country. And because of that, the county had a lot of money to play with in providing people rental assistance. However, that program is winding down, leaving the county with significantly less money to play with. So that means they can't serve everybody that needs help. They have to choose. And the question is like, how do we choose? How do we identify the people who need it the most? And on the other hand, eviction is a known pathway into homelessness. So can we use rental assistance as a homelessness prevention tool, right? So there is experimental evidence that it can be, but how can we do that? And the third question is, now currently we expect people to reach out when they have trouble. Can we develop some data-driven method rather than them having to reach out to us? Can we reach out to them, right? They don't have to initiate contact. We will initiate the contact, we meaning the government, right? These 3 questions were the starting points to this project. So the current practice is a person is going through trouble, they're struggling to pay rent, they have an eviction case filed against them in courts. They come to the government and say, hey, I'm having trouble. They get placed in a queue. They are basically first come, first served, right? So based on when you apply, it determines when you get served. The proposed practice is, rather than waiting for people to connect us, we will look at all the data that we have and identify the most vulnerable people. And then rather than waiting for them to call us, we will call them, right? We will go out and knock on doors and do this. This data-driven identification of most vulnerable, what I mean by most vulnerable I'll get to in a bit, is where we like machine learning and AI can help, right? And to do this project, we had this massive data warehouse available. The county, Allegheny County, is one of the better local government agencies in terms of their data infrastructure. They have records of a person receiving a certain service at a given time. So that record is there. So basically, let's say public housing, there's this person, Kasun, received public housing services from this date to this date. That data is available. That is available for housing, that's available for behavioral and mental health crises, other public benefits like food stamps and TANF and stuff like that. Whenever an eviction case gets filed against them in courts, we have that information from the courts. The homelessness management system gives you information about every person who's interacting with like emergency shelters and homelessness shelters. Demographic information, all of this information is available going back to like 2012. So we had when we project started, it was like 10 years worth of data for people, county residents interacting with county services. This was the data that we had to play with. So now we have to, one, design a machine learning system that helps us identify the most vulnerable individuals so that we can reach out to them. using that data that we have available about the service usage history. So I saw that Lily in her talk also kind of presented this modeling formulation. We ask 5 primary questions when we want to design the machine learning problem. So we have an operational problem. Now we need a machine learning problem that kind of solves that operational problem. The 5 questions we go through is, how often do we need to do this? So this meaning outreach, right? So we want to go knock on doors or call people and say, hey, we know that you're going through a rough time. We want to help you. How often can we do that? Here is it every day? Can we do every week, every month? And how many people can we do that? What's your capacity? So if it's every month, how many people can you reach out to every month, right? And who do we include in the analysis? So we said most vulnerable. Among who? What is the universe of people we are considering here? Is it everyone in the county, or is it everybody who has an eviction filing, everybody who has like everybody who's a renter? Like what is the universe? What is the output here? So what does the outreach team needs? Let's say they're outreaching like 100 people every month. What do they need? Basically, they need a list of names or houses to go, right? Like what is the specific output? So basically, putting all of these 5 questions together, we come up with this formulation. So the formulation, the problem that the machine learning model will try to solve is, every month, among individuals who have an eviction filing, so currently active eviction case, that there are informal evictions in the county where like landlords just go and evict people like from their house, kick people out from their house without having court orders, which is illegal to do, but that happens. Unfortunately, we don't have visibility into that. The only universe that we have visibility into is if someone files an eviction case in the courts. So that is a universe. Anybody who has an eviction case filing. And we, like, by talking to our stakeholders, we understood that they can do outreach every month, and every month they can do outreach to 100 people. So the output of the system has to be the 100 people that they need to outreach. And how do we identify that 100 people? Is by predicting the likelihood of someone entering into homelessness in the next 12 months. So that is what we're predicting using the machine learning model. So given a person, can we predict how likely that person is to interact with a homelessness service in the next 12 months? And why do we do all of these? So that we can prioritize for outreach and rental assistance. So now we have a model. How do we represent a person? We need a way to represent a person in a numerical vector to feed it to the machine learning model, right? So we build a bunch of features. One is we build features to capture historical service usage of a person. For each person, how many past eviction cases do they have? How many homelessness service interactions do they have? How many days have they spent homeless? How many mental health interactions do they have? So for all the services that we have information about, we create these like counts of like how many times, how long has it been since you interacted with that service. So a bunch of information, right? And also to capture temporal trends, like to understand how things change over time, we create that same feature over different time horizons. For instance, number of days spent homeless in the last year versus the last 3 years versus the last 5 years, right? Like 3 distinct features, but kind of capturing the same quantity over different time horizons in the past. And data leakage is a huge issue in problems like these, because we have to pretend that we are in different places in time and use the data before that. So how we try to prevent data leakage here is we only use information up until the prediction date to train the model, and then we predict into the future. So, and now we have a way to capture people in a numerical vector. So what models do we build here, right? So we call this the prioritization support tool, because there's no agent here. It's not agentic. It's the machine learning model is giving an output that humans use to make a decision, right? So what we are doing basically is we take the cohort of people, that means everybody who has an eviction case filing, and map them to an ordinal scale. What that means is we calculate the risk of homelessness for each person. Highest risk goes on top, the lowest risk goes in the bottom. So we're basically ranking people, right? And to do that, we use one machine learning approaches. We tested a bunch of machine learning approaches, starting with simple linear models, decision trees, all the way up to like ensembles like boosting trees, bagging trees like random forests, even neural networks. But like neural networks haven't been historically like great at tabular structured data tasks, so very rarely do they come up on top. Those, and not just machine learning models, we calculate simple heuristics and we consider alternatives to machine learning. It's very important to consider alternatives to machine learning because machine learning models are very expensive to build, very expensive to maintain, and we are talking about government agencies here, right? Like at some point they will have to absorb this model and maintain it for a long period of time, and if it's like this complex model, it will add to the cost of their operations. If it's like a simple heuristic where we just use 2 or 3 indicators to like a rule-based system, or we use like one indicator to rank people, it's much simpler to implement, easier to understand, easier to explain, and cost is much lower as well of deployment. So we need to kind of consider those approaches and compare across them to understand whether the added complexity of the machine learning model kind of justifies, the performance gain that we get from machine learning model justifies the added complexity. That's why we consider simple heuristics. And I think one of the lessons I would take away from this is like always try to do that no matter what business or operational case that you kind of deal with. So just to see like how this embeds into the overall process, so we have individuals with active eviction case filings that are universe of people. We send them through, so we represent them in a numerical vector, as I mentioned, send them to the prioritization support tool or the PST, which can be a machine learning model or a heuristic. And then output of that is ranking of that entire cohort from highest risk to lowest risk, right? And once we have that ranking, we take the highest K individuals with the highest risk, K individuals with the highest risk, and select them for rental assistance outreach. So that K is determined by the resource constraints of the setting. So if you remember the formulation, what we were saying is every month we have resources to outreach to 100 people. So K equals 100 here, right? Okay, now this is how the whole decision process works. How do we evaluate this piece here is the next question, right? What are the metrics that we need to check? Typically, in a classification problem, what we do is we calculate AUC or accuracy, and we're done with it, right? Which is not exactly useful here because we want to evaluate the operational utility of the machine learning model, meaning how well would it do in this particular use case at helping a decision maker choose the 100 people, right? So evaluation we do we look at 3 axes. One is efficiency, right? This is a limited resource that the government has. We want to efficiently use that resource. That means we want to minimize limited resources going to people who wouldn't become homeless, even without the money, right? Because our goal is to minimize homelessness. If all the money goes to people who wouldn't become homeless anyway, then it's a waste of money, right? So we want to direct funds to people who would end up becoming homeless. So the metric that we use to calculate that is precision. Not just any precision, but precision in this top K, right? We want to be effective at resource allocation. That means, so we want to give resources to not just people who need it, but also people who would benefit from it. What I mean by that is, let's say a person has a very high need, they're at very high risk of becoming homeless. Rental assistance alone might not solve their problems, right? So that's where we need to make the distinction of, like, does this person need this help? Yes. Is this help enough to them? So one could argue that we should help people who we can change their outcome. So if we didn't help them, they would become homeless. But when we help them, they wouldn't become homeless, would not become homeless, right? That's the the effectiveness piece. And it's difficult to evaluate that with observational data. So we end up using sensitivity or recall or true positive rate at K as a proxy for that. And the third piece is equity. We want to allocate resources cognizant to the historical disadvantages that in this policy domain that different racial groups and different subgroups of society have faced. And also we don't want to exacerbate existing biases, right? So there are disparities in homelessness rates, for instance, across white individuals and Black individuals. So if we equally serve those groups, the disparity would remain the same. But if we overserve the Black community, the disparity could go down, right? So those value judgments, how do we evaluate what would happen to equity if we use this model, is also a dimension that we care about. And we typically use, in this instance, we use the ratio of recall between the groups. So we compare the recall of Black individuals to recall of white individuals to capture that. I will skip this part for now. So this is how we basically train and validate our models, because random cross-validation, like k-fold cross-validation that we do in a typical project or typical ML effort, doesn't work here. It violates the assumptions of the use case. So we kind of need to fall into a temporally aware cross-validation scheme. So going to the results. So we, in our best machine learning model on average, so each of these points are a single model. So we pretend to be at different points in time and we run the model and get the performance, right? So we can now evaluate how well the model would do across time. This gray box here is the pandemic. During the pandemic, the government basically said, no, you can't evict any people. So there were no evictions cases. So there was no cohort of people. So that doesn't really matter, that period. That's why we gray that out and exclude it from the analysis. So we can see there are 4 lines here, right? Like the blue line is the random forest, and random forest seems on average the best model in terms of precision. The average precision that we see is around 21-22%. One could say, is it just 22% precision? Is that good? Because you're wrong in the top 100, you're only right about 21 people. You're wrong about 79 people, right? How is that good? What good is not absolute. So in a lot of the benchmark applications of machine learning, we are striving for like 90% precision or accuracy, right? Here we can't do that, because if you look at the red line below, I think I should be using this. This is a random selection. How correct would you be if you selected 100 people at random? Which is kind of akin to choosing first come, first served, because it's a quasi-random assignment, right? We are only correct 2% of the time if we did that. So compared to that alternative, the best precision is almost 10 times better. So it's not the fact that its absolute precision is 20%, but it's 10 times better than the alternative. That's what we should be looking at. And I want to point out the green line. So this green line is days since last homelessness spell, which is a simple heuristic, which is very close to the random forest line, right? So simple heuristic, we are only using one indicator to rank people. We are using how recent was your, how many days since has it been since you were homeless last. If you were homeless very recently, you go to the top of the list. If you were homeless a long time ago, you go to the bottom of the list. If you've never been homeless, you go to the very bottom of the list, right? You can see that, like, in terms of precision, it's very close to the random forest model. So one could argue, if we presented this to the stakeholders, so they could say, like, hey, random forest, like, maintaining that is a huge cost to us. We'll have to retrain it. We'll have to have compute resources to run that every week, like create features, all of that. It's very costly. It adds to the cost of the program. Can't we just use this one indicator that we collect? It's a very simple calculation. Everyone can understand it. We can explain it to people easier. Can't we just use that? Which is a fair request. But the only thing is, precision is not, average precision is not the whole story. Can anyone tell me, like, if we use days since last homeless as an indicator, is there a subgroup of people that we would completely ignore from the intervention, that who would never receive money? So I'll answer the question. We would never reach people who've never become homeless, right? So people who would have an eviction filing and become homeless for the first time, we would never reach if we used this as an indicator to select them, because they would be at the bottom of the list. They would never come up to the top 100. So those are the kind of, like, things that we need to think about. So precision is not the, even though, like, the efficiency, in terms of efficiency, they are kind of similar, it's not the only dimension that we care about. So one interesting that we found was, we compared our machine learning based approach to what they do today. And what we found was, so in a single cohort, as of like 2022 August 1st, this is an old analysis, 111 people from that cohort became homeless, but 89% of them never even reached out for rental assistance. That means the current practice completely ignored those 89, overlooked those 89 people, right? And we checked, out of those 89 people, how many would, had someone used our machine learning model at that point, how many would we have identified? So we saw that, like, 26% of that people would have been identified had we used the machine learning model. It's not great, it's not perfect, but it's still a much higher percentage than the current practice. So that's also an improvement. And this is one result that we use to convince our stakeholders, our partners, to help them understand the value of using machine learning in this context, even though at first glance 20% precision doesn't seem like much. Right? So where we are at the project now is, modeling has completed. It's never completed, but we are at a mature enough stage for deployment. We have data engineering pipelines working to refresh the data that we need on a weekly basis and update our models. And we've built processes so to get from the predictions of the model to the output that the outreach folks care about, like the organizations who do the outreach, and automatically generating that output. It's a spreadsheet basically going out. And we've been working with the county data science team to hand over the models that we built at CMU to their side. They are kind of implementing the models, and we've been helping them build a similar model with the data that they have access to on their infrastructure. One question that we would have been dealing with for a while is, would the machine learning based outreach replace the current practice, or would we leave the current practice as is and deploy this alongside it so that it will act as an augmentation? We've settled on the augmenting part of it, because the county government doesn't want to say no to people who are kind of calling in right now and asking for help. So we've settled on this, and we have started a randomized control trial where we are assigning people to this outreach-based treatment, and leaving out a group for control to really evaluate the impact of the machine learning models at reducing homelessness rates. We've been running it since last October. Results could change over time, but so far what we've seen is promising. It is reducing homelessness in the rate that we expect it to. So that's promising. Some lessons that we've learned from this project is don't just start building models. Talk to a diverse set of stakeholders, like program leaders and people who are actually taking the machine learning outputs and doing something with it, the frontline workers in the process, involve the tech teams in the process who would adopt your models that we would build. Uh, like starting those conversations early, we left them to the end, and while the modeling work has been in this like matured state for the last, I don't know, maybe 18 months ago we got there, but like it took more than a year for us to have those conversations with the tech teams, the frontline workers, and the program leaders to really identify how this model would kind of fit into their process as they run it today. So having those conversations early was like a big lesson from this project, and getting agreement from them on like how to determine and implement, like how to implement the system and how to validate that system in the field. Yeah, well, that's kind of it from me.